Germany, after the Great War, was like a broken down car. Just when everyone thought it couldn't get any worse, the communists showed up with tools ready to fix it. But everyone was worried that they turned it into a Soviet tank. This is to say that had Germany become communist instead of ultranationalist after the Great War, they would most likely become an ally of the Soviet Union. And considering how these countries performed in the Second World War, do you think that they would be able to take over the entire world and turn it communist? Let me show you what I came up with. One way for Germany to become communist is for the Spartacus League to take over Germany, perhaps with a more successful Spartacus uprising, which occurred in Berlin for 1 week in January 1919. It was only put down by the Freikorps, but had it not been for them, the Spartacus League may have really taken over Germany. The problem with this scenario is if it succeeds, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht would most likely influence the new country in their ideology. Although this would make Germany go communist, Rosa Luxemburg openly didn't support Lenin and the Bolsheviks. She said that it would be a miracle if the Bolsheviks take over Germany, as they were so incompetent. We can't ever know how the Spartacus League take on over Germany if they would cooperate with the Soviet Union, which would make for a more boring scenario. Instead, let me offer you something perhaps more plausible to happen, but also more interesting and exciting, for the sake of this alternate history series. I also made a video on the Bavarian Soviet Republic succeeding, and there I used the exact same point of divergence of not sending in the Freikorps, so this would be repetitive and boring. Historically, there were many communist uprisings in Germany during the German Revolution, and on the screen you can see the most famous ones. Next to them is the number of days that they survived, so as you can see, on average it was less than a month. For example, the Alsace-Lorraine Soviet Republic survived for only 12 days before being incorporated into France. So let me change that, and what if all of these communist uprisings, but also even more, succeeded? What if all went perfect for the communists in Germany? Historically, there was no communist party in Germany up until 1919, and it formed just before the Spartacus uprising, in which it took part in. What all the German communists had in common was their anti-war views. For example, the USPD, Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany, split from the SPD, which was ruling Germany during the war and was openly pro-war. My point of divergence lies in the German strike of January 1918. The strike was caused by food shortages, war weariness, and the subsequent October Revolution in Russia, which encouraged the Germans to revolt and establish a Marxist Germany. The USPD were behind the strike, and they wanted to put an end to the war. The strike involved over 1 million people in important industrial locations, so it was a major issue for Imperial Germany. The way the Germans dealt with the strike is the most important, as they arrested its leaders and sent them to the front lines. For sure, had this uprising been put down more violently, it would have made its cause more popular. After all, the USPD were against the war, but also about 1 million workers who openly supported them. This act of sending people directly to the front lines could quickly spiral out of control, making more workers not sympathetic to the communist causes want to join them. In the mid-1980s, most of the workers and even the German public were against the war, due to the earlier mentioned food shortages, increase in poverty, and the fact that they were on the losing side. As such, I can see the USPD and the Spartacus League to form the KPD, which would be the Communist Party of Germany a lot sooner, and it would get more support from the workers, who wanted to put an end to the war. The communists of Germany were strongly anti-war before it even started, so their cause of peace and bread, just like the Bolsheviks, would make them really popular with the working class, but especially the promised Council Republic and collective leadership. Basically, the workers would own the factories, and their profits would be distributed among the workers, not the owner or the shareholders. These workers could in theory democratically vote for leaders in an organized structure, and can dismiss them at any time. This would be at least promised to the people. With that, the KDP has laid really strong foundations and would secure even more support. But it wouldn't be up until Ernst Thälmann would write and publish the following in a newspaper, which would hit Germany like a bomb. Comrades, fellow workers, countrymen and the soldiers on the front lines. I call for an end of this senseless war. Only the Kaiser and the aristocracy would benefit from its victory, but we, the common workers and soldiers, pay the price. No matter if Imperial Germany wins or not, we are the losers in this system. I come straight from the front lines. I mutinied together with 4 brave comrades. I fought in the Battle of Champagne, the Battle of Somme, up until the Battle of Soissons. I have participated in the war for over 3 years, and today I deserted, as I realized that not my countrymen and workers would be victorious, but the Kaiser and the upper class. Workers, soldiers, fellow countrymen, unite. We must put an end to this senseless war that has brought poverty and hunger upon the German people, but most importantly, to punish the people responsible. The people who started it and who are benefiting from it. I dream of a greater Germany, where the workers and the common people would be the one benefiting in the system. I call for all workers to join an organized strike by the KPD, and for all soldiers on the front lines to mutiny and see their families again. With that message, Ernst Thälmann would become the uniting force of the left-leaning socialist parties, just like how the Austrian painter united the German nationalist and militaristic parties. This is because the left-leaning socialist parties weren't united into one and didn't cooperate very well, and this would resolve this issue. As I said earlier, his message would hit Germany like a bomb, and it would spread like wildfire. I assume that it would be published around late October, just in time for the Kiel Mutiny of the 3rd of November 1918, which would be even more successful. Historically, the Kiel Mutiny happened because sailors were ordered a near-suicidal mission, as Germany wanted to defeat the British High Seas Fleet decisively, so it was all or nothing for the German war effort. These sailors and soldiers refused their orders and formed the Kiel Mutiny and Workers' Council, later spreading the message across Germany. It would sound like this. Fellow countrymen, we are the sailors of Kiel, and we were ordered to carry out a suicidal attack, only so that His Majesty, the Kaiser, would win the war. But the people who fought in it and who already died would be the real losers. We have refused those orders and successfully taken over Kiel, establishing a Soviet Republic. You can do the same. Glory to the German Soviet Republic. Let us all unite and stop the war and punish the people who started it. This message in this alternate history would reinforce the beliefs of the common workers that they need peace, and that the German imperial family shouldn't be supported any longer. The workers would be promised control over their own factories, but also their profits, so the communist revolution would start nationwide in Germany, unlike in our own timeline. In only 2 weeks, 2 massive mutinies already happened, the one of Ernst Thälmann and the Kiel sailors, which in this alternate history would spiral out of control. Soldiers and workers would follow an organized strike by the KDP, as the soldiers would safely desert or surrender, according to KDP instructions, while the workers would seize all military production or even sabotage it. This would cripple Imperial Germany and make them sign a peace treaty a bit sooner than in our own timeline, as the Kaiser would want to deal with their domestic situation and try to make sure that he stays in power. Of course, this is before the Treaty of Versailles was written, which would later banish him and strip him of his titles. With that, the Entente would win the Great War, but the video is not even halfway done, as I want to tell you how Germany would become communist, their alliance with the Soviet Union, and the subsequent partition of Poland between the two, and the start of the Second World War. Immediately after the Great War has ended, the Bremen Soviet Republic would be proclaimed, as sailors from Kiel would send a delegation and sought support. The Alsace-Lorraine Soviet Republic is also proclaimed, hoping that they wouldn't be annexed by France, but unfortunately for them, they would be short-lived, as the communists in Germany cannot protect them just yet. What would soon happen would be described in the history books as German November, or Germany's November Revolution, just like the October Revolution in Russia. The thing is that the October Revolution actually happened in November, but was called as such because the Russians used a different calendar. Basically, Germany would openly revolt and try to become communist exactly 1 year after the Bolsheviks did. I can see the KDP to further their support, especially in North Germany, as the Hamburg Uprising would also succeed. Historically, it happened in 1923, so 5 years later, but considering the situation, I think it could have happened a lot sooner and looked similar. All of these communist rebellions would be successful, as the German Empire lacks the soldiers and the production to fight them. This is because at that point the people would be tired of the German imperial family and their orders. Let me remind you historically what happened in the January Uprising of 1918, which I already mentioned. About 1 million workers organized a nationwide strike, and the Kaiser ordered that the leaders are imprisoned and sent to the front lines. Now the workers would be more wary of trusting the Kaiser, as they can see themselves as pawns in his game, where they would be sacrificed and be forced to fight other workers. As such, more workers and soldiers of the Great War would flock to the KDP rather than to the German Empire. This means that the German Empire would have less loyal soldiers and workers to produce war material, making their defeat inevitable. This would encourage even more communist sympathizers to revolt nationwide. The Ruhr Uprising would happen a lot sooner and would succeed, later connecting itself to Bremen and Hamburg. The Munich Soviet Republic and the Würzburg Soviet Republic formed the Bavarian Soviet Republic, on which I already made a video in detail in how they could succeed. Later, the entire Rhineland, comprised mainly of workers, flocks to the communist cause. In the midst of the chaos, the Freikorps could coup the central government, as they would occupy Berlin. This is because the German Empire would send in the Freikorps to deal with these rebellions, but the Freikorps and similar nationalistic groups were also especially mad at the Kaiser for ending a lot sooner, as they believed that they could have won. In the eyes of the Freikorps, the Kaiser started the war, and when it went against him, he is trying to use any means necessarily to keep himself in power. The Freikorps also wanted to continue the Great War, so them supporting the Kaiser is really absurd to happen. As such, they would take power and arrest the German royal family, effectively starting a civil war in Germany between the communists and the nationalists. The thing is that the Freikorps make a fatal mistake of taking over Berlin, as they would spend a lot of resources, allowing the Saxony and Thuringia uprisings to succeed, instead of repressing them. This means that the communists now have a stronger position, and this alternate civil war is starting to look really similar to the Russian Civil War, of which I may have taken some inspiration, I will admit. For the communists, they know that if they take Berlin, they would secure all of Germany, so this would become their immediate goal. Considering that the communists would have a lot of veterans supporting their cause, and they would control most of the production in Germany, they would muster a larger army than the Freikorps. The two sides would meet near Berlin in the city of Potsdam, but the communists from Saxony and Thuringia would go up north and effectively encircle Potsdam, and most of the Freikorps troops in there, which would open up the way to Berlin. With that, the German Civil War would be over before the Russian Civil War, and the German workers would be liberated. Germany would be made up of smaller communist republics, which would unite to form the German Soviet Council Republics. Of course, Germany is yet to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which would get drafted in 1919, close to a year after the war had ended. The Entente would be outraged at these events, and the peace treaty on Germany would be way harsher than it was in our own timeline. Historically, the Entente didn't punish Germany too much, as they didn't want them to turn communist, but the opposite, to be a bulwark against communism. This time there is no need for that, so I expect the French to try to expand as much as to the Rhine, perhaps forming a Rhine protectorate. The thing is that I doubt that this would really happen, due to the ideas of self-determination introduced by Woodrow Wilson, but also I don't see any of France's allies to support this. Believe it or not, the Entente wanted to prevent a Second World War from happening, and even the Great War was called the War to End All Wars, so Britain would prefer that Germany gets to keep the Rhineland. This is because if France were to take it, they would guarantee that Germany would in the future attempt to retake it, which would start a Second World War, something that Britain and especially America wanted to prevent. Italy would support the claims of France if the French support the Italian claims in Dalmatia, but this is not enough, as I assume that Britain and America would have a larger sway on how the peace treaty goes, but also the League of Nations would get formed. As such, I expect France and Italy to be outraged, but for now they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. The French cannot simply continue the war against Germany, as historically France also suffered from mutiny among its soldiers, who had socialist and communist views. As such, if France were to invade a socialist country, a considerable part of the French soldiers would desert or switch sides, potentially starting a civil war in France. As such, France would limit Germany in other ways, by striving for more war reparations and a lower army limit of Germany, which would be accepted. On the Western Front, the peace treaty would look identical, but on the East, Poland would soon find itself in a conflict with the Soviet Union, which was the Polish-Soviet War of 1919-1921, but I would explore this later. As for Germany, they would consolidate power and do as they promised to their people, which is seizing the factories and giving them to the workers, who would get the profits, but also forming the council system. You may quickly suggest that Germany would have less competent rulers, as they would be firstly chosen by their ideological loyalty, not their skill set, thus limiting the German potential, but this wouldn't be the case. As I said earlier, the workers would vote on who ends up ruling them, and immediately they can call for snap elections and remove this person from power. Germany would implement an arguably better version of communism compared to that of the Soviet Union, as it would actually give power to the workers, not establish a communist dictatorship. Ernst could be the first leader of the German Soviet Council Republics, and historically he was a supporter and an ally of the Soviet Union. In 1923, he even met Lenin, which I think would happen in this alternate timeline a lot sooner. The SPD started the war in Germany, and the communists were against that, Some key SPD leaders would be tried and imprisoned for starting the war, but there will most likely not be brutal assassinations and political instability. To put it simply, the German communists in this alternate timeline are anti-war, and these views made them rise to power in the first place. Still, I expect Germany not to suffer from the same problems as the Weimar Republic right after they were established, as the Germans would increase trade with the Soviet Union and perhaps be slightly wealthier compared to the Weimar Republic, which at the time was unpopular and dysfunctional. As such, there is no hyperinflation crisis, but the increased war reparations to France would definitely take a toll on Germany's economy. As the profits would go to the workers, the central government would need to increase taxes of these profits, as to make sure that they can pay France, but also to keep the state running. Still, the workers are likely to see a better standard of living, while the upper class would be stripped of their assets, but not be repressed, jailed or eliminated. Most of them I can see moving down south to Austria or Switzerland, together with their wealth and belongings. This wouldn't be considered a brain drain, as it's mostly from the aristocracy, seeking to establish businesses and keep their wealth and standard of living in other countries. Lenin may order the German Soviet Council republics to imprison these people, but the Germans would refuse and let them go. This would show to the world, but especially the Soviets, that Germany is not a puppet of the Soviet Union, but is an equal partner. Still, I expect all things in Germany to go back to normal, and without the rise of the ultranationalists in power, there is likely never going to be a brain drain. This means that Albert Einstein has no reason to flee Germany and go to the United States of America, so he would stay, together with many great German scientists. Under the Council Republic, I can potentially see Einstein to be elected as a ruler for a couple of months or up to a year. Albert Einstein considered himself a pacifist and a socialist, which perfectly aligns with the KDP ideals of anti-war and socialism. The fact was that Einstein was a Jew, which would make him slightly less popular at the time, as pretty much all of Europe was openly anti-Semitic, which could include this new communist Germany. Whether he becomes the ruler for a single term or not, it doesn't change the scenario, but I think it's a cool detail to mention. As for France and Italy, they would take a different turn politically. Historically, the Italians turned to ultranationalism because they felt betrayed by their former allies of France and Britain, as they never got their promised lands of Dalmatia and later the Anatolian coastline. Of course, this is the surface level of the matter, as I, along with the majority of my community, think that Italy would still go ultranationalist even if they got Dalmatia. The reason for the rise of ultranationalism in Italy was that the Italian economy was very weak, and Italy was broke economically after the Great War and the Italo-Turkish War of 1911 to 1912. In fact, the Italian economy more or less stagnated for 10 years, while the economies of other European countries were outgrowing the Italian one. By the end of the war, about 2 million Italians, most of them were veterans of the war, found themselves unemployed. The Italian factories were producing war material, and when the war ended, these factories were forced to shut down, bringing even more discontent and unemployment with it. The socialists in Italy were starting to gain ground and could have secured a government, so ultranationalism became increasingly popular, as it promised to solve all of these issues. Remember that, as the socialists were also increasing in popularity in France, which is really important. France, just like Italy, would see socialist strikes in late 1918 and early 1919, for sure even more than it saw historically, due to the presence of the communist Germans on their doorstep. The French would see how in Italy the ultranationalists are cracking down on the socialist rebellions and preserving peace, law and order. I think you can already sense what I'm alluding to, which is that France would soon embrace the ultranationalist ideology. The French would see that their army consisted of a lot of socialist sympathizers, which could pose a threat to France, but also France was economically broken after the war, at least compared to the United States of America and Britain. Most importantly, France would feel cheated on their gains, as they wanted the Rhineland as a protectorate, but their former allies of Britain and America didn't allow them to do so. The only real French ally would be Italy, and both countries would promise to work together and stand strong against communism. Immediately, they would realize that Germany may soon look to Austria, as they would strive to keep the Austrians in their sphere of influence. Something similar to the Rome Protocols would be created a lot sooner, and they would include Italy, France, Austria and Hungary. Austria is the key member of the alliance, as not only it would make Hungary disconnected from the rest if the Austrians were to leave, but also because in early 1919 there was a real possibility that Austria would join Germany. This is because Austria at the time was led by the Social Democratic Party of Austria, which would greatly sympathize with the communist Germans up north and want to unite with them, as Austria after the war was left in ruins. Austria-Hungary benefited the Austrian portion a lot, but after the war, Austria couldn't survive as an independent country, as their industry was in Czechoslovakia, their farms and fields were now in Hungary, and their sea access was now under Yugoslavia. Thus, historically, Austria and the Soviet Democratic Party of Austria wanted to join Germany for a better standard of living. France and Italy would try to prevent this, but this new alliance would solve a lot of problems for Austria, making it a sweet alternative. This way, Austria and Hungary would get sea access through Italy, but also Austria can trade with their allies for food, improving their domestic situation and stability. Finally, Italy can invest into Austrian industry, which would practically solve all of the problems that made Austria want to join Germany in the first place. This way, the Austrians can solve their problems without giving up their independence to a foreign power like Germany, so Austria would become allied to France and Italy, but some in the country would still seek to join Germany and organize demonstrations in the country. Of course, I don't expect France and Italy to immediately become ultranationalist after the Great War, but they would go down this path and maybe become fully nationalist by 1922, close to 4 years after the war had ended. The year in this scenario is still 1919, and believe it or not, the world would get even crazier. The Polish-Soviet War would still happen, and would look about the same for a year. This is up until the Soviet Union calls upon Germany for help, shortly before the Soviet Union advances to take Warsaw. The German communists are pacifists and against any forms of war, but they can see this war as necessity to make their nation stronger. This would hopefully make France think twice before attacking them, which would mean that for the Germans, the best defense would be offense. As the Germans would want to secure their new Soviet Council Republic, their values and independence, they may choose to enter the war on the Soviet side. Of course, their goal is not to restore their imperial borders, as the communists in Germany are against the German Empire, but they would want to liberate the Polish workers, which would be popularized by Rosa Luxemburg, which was of Polish origin and is not eliminated during the Spartacus uprising, but is a prominent member of the German Communist Party. With that, Germany and their limited army would agree that their best course of action would be to take chunks of Poland for themselves, liberate the Polish workers, grow stronger and eventually retake Alsace-Lorraine, which did proclaim itself as a Soviet republic, but was crushed by the French. Also, the war would look like an easy victory for the Germans, as the Soviet Union was nearing Warsaw and Poland just got created as an independent country, so why let the opportunity pass? Would France and Italy immediately declare war on Germany and the Soviet Union? Find out in the next episode, as I'm starting a new series. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you there. Goodbye.